All right, so continuing with part 2 of our elements and principles, which we're talking about the principles of design. The next one would be contrast. And contrast is a work of art that is created when the artist makes a difference in value, color, texture, shape, line, form, or space. So if we take a look, we know that color, texture, shape, line, form, space, and value are all elements of art. So what they're doing here is they are deciding what areas they want to kind of stand out from another and create more of a focal point just by using contrast. So you've got contrast in value, and value is where something goes from dark to light, which we learned about. And so we have here Durs. It is a print that was created by etching, and it is just black and white. And he creates contrast by adding more heavy line work in areas that make shadows and help kind of depict the image as well as make it more three-dimensional. Then we have Andy Warhol here, who creates contrast by playing with different colors. And so what he does is take one image and then changes the colors or inverts them to create different contrast between all of the images in the one painting. Many times you'll see a Warhol print or painting that has multiple images of the same subject. And a lot of times you will see Marilyn Monroe or even Coca-Cola and different items like that. And then the last one is using texture to create contrast. So here we've got an image where our background has a different texture than our subject or model playing the guitar. And so there's a balance between the texture, and that also creates a difference between the image itself and the background. Then we have pattern, and pattern, repetition, and rhythm is the repeating of shapes, lines, colors, or other art elements in planned or random order to create interesting or make the artwork more exciting. So if we look here, we've got many different very angular shopping carts that create a pattern in the line work. So if you take a look at the bottom of the card itself, it's got more of a grid-like pattern, and then as you go up, the lines are a little bit wider apart and the grids become larger. But you notice that in each cart, even though it's in a different direction, it still creates the same pattern within each other. So he's still creating repetition and pattern by just using line and the way that the line is applied on the paint drawing itself. Then to the left here, or right, we've got pattern in the way that the clothes and stuffed animals are hanging. Now they may not be in a specific pattern, but all together they create a pattern itself, or a rhythm. If you look down at the bottom too, you see in the fence, we've got the fence posts here that create a pattern, and they repeat. Each part of the fence is repeating across the page. You can also see in the brick wall in the back here that we've got a pattern of creating a different design within the bricks, and then the clothes themselves, which are more random, but still create a pattern in the way. You can look even at the way that they are draped at the top. All the clothes seem to have this draping effect that would create a pattern as well. So sometimes when we're looking at more of a random order, you have to really look at the image and study it before you can kind of see the pattern or the repetition happening. And then our last one is movement. And movement in a work of art directs the viewer throughout the art piece, often the focal area. It also encourages the viewer to sense action within the work of art. So here we have 3 different paintings of Van Gogh, very different in palette choices and color, but our eye is moving throughout the page. The one that I noticed the most is Starry Night, here to the right. And you can see the focal point here. My eye always seems to go to this swirly part that I kind of like to talk about as representing more of like the wind. But even the way that Van Gogh used his brushstrokes when creating all of the design, it shows a sense of movement. It gives kind of an exciting feeling. It almost seems like the picture itself is alive. Then the one in the middle here, we've got movement because it's more of a perspective where everything is leading to one point. And you can see that there are people in the city street here, and you know that they're walking probably or standing and visiting, but there's some type of interaction and movement between the people in the city street that you would see on a normal everyday basis. So that's kind of helping create movement as well. And then our last painting, the one to the left, where I see movement here is in the water. How the lights and the stars are reflecting on the water and how the water has a different ripple effect creates a movement. You know, it doesn't show a still, calm night. There's a little bit of movement and a few waves throughout the painting as well. So that kind of directs my eye here. And then my eye starts kind of at the top of this painting looking at the stars, but then it directly moves down to the reflections. And then the reflections lead us to the foreground here, where we have a couple walking probably from the boat that they just exited off of. And when we have class, I'll throw up a few paintings and we can talk about some of the elements or principles that we see and kind of discuss things that we can point out together. All right, and then the last little part, I know we've kind of talked about both of these, but I have a video here as well that I found that I thought was pretty interesting, and it basically just talks about balance, but I thought that it was kind of a great explanation of how you can create balance in many different ways. So hopefully you can hear it okay, and then if you aren't able to, I will send this video link to you as well if you want to watch it separately if there's too much background noise.
Here you see I've drawn a simple scale. It's got a fulcrum in the center, and if I were to put a heavy object on one side, it would not be balanced. This side would go down and the other side would go up. Okay, well what if I put an equal weight object on the other side? Then you'd have balance. So if I had a smaller object on one side, I could still have a balance if the larger object were moved closer to the fulcrum. Sound familiar? This is basic physics. If you can wrap your head around this idea, it's going to be no problem understanding this concept of visual balance. If you can think of your composition as one of those scales, then all of a sudden you have a balancing act. So if I have one object right in the center, we'll say he's on the fulcrum, that's balanced. If I were to move him to one side of the composition, that would be unbalanced. Now I could balance it again by duplicating him and giving it a bit of symmetry. So what this means is that each object in your scene carries visual weight. One way to achieve unity or harmony in your image is to have a balanced composition. So the balance can come in a couple different ways, but it doesn't have to be symmetrical. So I can shrink this guy down and put him in the distance. and then enlarge this guy, but move him closer to the center, or closer to the fulcrum, and it's still balanced. And it doesn't just need to be two objects either. You could have a large scene populated with tons of characters. Maybe it's one large character in the foreground, and then a whole crowd of other characters in the background. Because they're physically smaller in the composition, that gives them less visual weight. And so a whole crowd of characters can equal the weight of one character that's in the foreground. So this is still a balanced composition. So if you're not seeing it in this example, I'll show you a quick diagram. So here I've turned the same image into that horizontal scale. And you can see the left object is much larger, but it's closer to the fulcrum. And the objects on the right are smaller, but further from the fulcrum. And you end in a nice equilibrium, a nice visual balance. Looking at this, you would say those two are in total balance. In fact, it's a pretty symmetrical composition. But now I'll throw in some quick lighting. All of a sudden, it's not balanced anymore. The characters are equal size. If it were real life, they'd probably be equal physical weight, but they are definitely not equal visual weight. And this is because the value of an object, whether it's light or dark, has a big effect on visual weight. So all I did here was light it, and yet the balance of the image changed completely. So if I wanted to balance this out, I would have to add some extra light on the left side of the composition. Now there's much more visual balance, but there's not a symmetrical sense of lighting. And when you take a look at these abstracted value studies, these are balanced, and yet they have no subject matter at all. So you can see how important value is when it comes to balancing a composition. Generally speaking, things that are too symmetrical are boring. The trick to making really lively compositions is asymmetrical balance. So you have a large object that's counterbalanced by a group of smaller objects, or a light area that's counterbalanced by areas of dark. So when it comes to composing an image, there's a lot of factors. And generally speaking, your brain is already wired to recognize whether something is working or not working. When you see this line drawing, some part of your brain is already seeing this diagram. You're just not actively realizing it. So as you begin to understand these principles of design, you're going to unlock the code that your brain already knows about. So look at the bottom of the post, and you can download a PSD filled with some orcs. You can also try these same exercises with random black and white marks on a canvas, however you want to do it. But remember, it's not what you're drawing, it's how you're arranging it. So go try making some balanced compositions. Have fun, guys.
So hopefully that image there that I just showed sparks a little bit of interest in the way that you look at a picture and try and figure out if it's balanced or not. I just highlighted on that element or principle tonight because I came across this video and thought it was very interesting. So as we go through class, hopefully I can share other videos with you if you're interested and that you enjoyed this lesson. We will talk tomorrow about our paper that we have to do, and we will go over a few more things and possibly have a little game for our quiz. So make sure if you are watching the podcast that you send a summary to earn your points for that part, and then you're in class Thursday at 3:30. And if you're not able to make it to class, make sure you also watch the recording and then send a summary for that as well. All right, have a great week.